And if you miss anything, don't worry, because it's also recorded, and you can look at it afterwards. As you know, the Brussels briefing as a regular, you would see that today is a number 50, 50. That is a regular policy debate in Brussels that the CTA is very happy to co-organize with the European Commission. DG DEVCO leading, but also with other DGs within the European Commission, as well as the ACP group, which stands for Africa, Caribbean and Pacific, which is a group of 80 countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean and the Pacific. And thank you so much, ISG, for welcoming us in this house, in this important house, where the ambassadors, the ministers and the heads of state meet in official meetings. So we are very pleased to be here. And we also co-organize it with CONCORD, which is a platform of civil society organizations across development, of course, CSOs across Europe, and depending on the topics with other partners. We do organize the briefings since 2007, and we try to bring to the table for discussion and exchange of experience and best practices some of what we think are emerging issues or issues where we have new knowledge to share, new technologies, new thoughts. Of course, I welcome you as well on behalf of my director, Michael Ailou, who is currently in Abidjan with one of the events we co-organize with the African Development Bank, actually on youth entrepreneurship, which is one of the focus of CTA interventions now. So today we look at a very important topic on growing food in the cities. So not only urban, peri-urban agriculture in the traditional sense, but also all the new forms of soil-less agriculture, be hydroponics, vertical farming, aquaponics, rooftop gardens, etc. And all are interesting, are different, fit a purpose, but certainly are there to stay in a more and more urbanized world. So the panels we look at the trends and opportunities, not only across ACP countries, but across Europe. And the second panel will bring more, and thank you for coming, for some of the African countries, successes from entrepreneurs in some of the African countries. And by the way, I'm a bit sad to say that Mr. Pierre-François Benoit, who was our last speaker in panel 2 from Haiti, very successful business, I know it very well, couldn't make it for the visa issue. Visas are becoming more and more difficult, and we have really to do things much more in advance for all activities. But we will have other opportunities to bring him in, so he will not be here, and because of time difference, we cannot also have him online. Also, without more delay, I would like to thank again Mr. Vivanuk Nasunu, who is the Assistant Secretary General in this House, in charge of economic, trade, agriculture, so very important issues for CTA and for all of us. He has a background not only on the public sector, but private sector and entrepreneurship as well, and policy. So thank you very much. I know that you and Mr. Mitzi have important meetings this morning, certainly more important than this one, and that you still found the time to come and support us. So, Mr. Gnasunu, thank you very much, and you have the floor on behalf of the ACP.
Merci, Isolina.
Thank you, Isolina. Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, ambassadors, dear colleagues, dear participants. Leonard and myself are here because this is what's most important to do right now. We are delighted to be welcoming you here once again to continue our cycle of conferences and discussions on agriculture and to discuss training on agricultural practices, especially in ACP countries. This cycle has been going on for more than a decade now, and it's shown just how useful it is in terms of capacity building, providing training, and we're very happy to have this topic on the table here today, urban agriculture. Some years ago, it was considered to be a hobby still. It was considered to be something that was done by the bourgeoisie. But today it's considered to be a new opportunity and allows us to bring together a number of policies whether it be those for food security, nutritional security, also preserving the economy, the environment, and town and country planning. When we talk about traditional agriculture, we typically are talking about people who have been doing things for centuries and know what works, what doesn't work, and know where we can make progress. But here, typically, we're dealing with people who maybe don't have the necessary background and who sometimes have the best of intentions, but can engage in practices that represent some difficulties or even threats. So it's very important that we talk about this matter, urban agriculture, and that we bring together the different dimensions it has. Of course, if you look at the first one, which is nutrition, especially in cities, because you can imagine that people can have different approaches when it comes to urban agriculture, whether you look at Europe and so-called developed countries, or whether you look at ACP countries, our ACP countries, because preoccupations can be slightly, if not fundamentally different from one place to the next. Our cities are experiencing very fast growth. We're expecting growing populations. We're trying to make sure that our production chains are shorter and shorter. We want to make sure that what's consumed in cities is produced as close as possible to the cities. But we're also trying to find jobs for this growing urban population. I'm looking at the ambassador from Côte d'Ivoire. We can use Abidjan as an example. Abidjan today is not what it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Recent history has meant that people have moved to Abidjan. These people are there. You can't just send them back from where they came from. So we need to give them occupations and feed them. So you have different histories, different backgrounds in the different cities and countries, and we have to try and find pragmatic and adapted, tailored solutions. I'm certain that in our debate today, we will be asking questions about the models that are to be developed for this practice, because we've moved from individual and cooperative models to full-scale business models that need to be tested and verified. Take them beyond agriculture in and of itself and look at the services that can be built around it. There's possibilities for training, making food available, distribution, beyond production. And there are entire things to be done on a digital level, how you can make information available, how can you be made aware of what's available where and when and how to get there. So those are possibilities for jobs. Because when you talk about development policies nowadays, sooner or later you're going to have to face the fact that our policies have to generate jobs. You'll be familiar with the figures in the African continent as well. You have about 18 million unemployed youths, to which dozens of millions are added each year. And you need to find employment for these young people. You need to feed them as well. So the challenges are there. I won't go back to the figures because I'm sure that Leonard, who's quite the connoisseur of figures, will be giving you some more. Now, today's topic is multisectoral, multidimensional, and we're quite sure that by having you here today, well, this is going to be the ideal setting for you to discuss these matters in a serene way, in an ideal way. Thank you once again for having come to ACP House, and I wish you a fruitful debate around this matter.
Any more delay? Thank you very much, Mr. Mizzi, for being with us. Mr. Mizzi is the acting director at the European Commission, DEVCO, on planet and prosperity, and is also the head of unit for rural development, food security, nutrition. He has joined the Commission, the European Commission, in 2007. He has worked, and we had the pleasure at CTA to work with him since then at DG Agri, looking at the EU markets, but with the group of ACP, so African, Caribbean and Pacific, and we are more than happy that he joined the DEVCO and the development community. He has, of course, a strong background on the policy, but also on private sector, agribusiness, SMEs, including not only across the ACP, but also on the small island economies, being from Malta, but not exclusively. So thank you very much for being here with us. We are very pleased to co-organize with you and the ACP since 2007 those briefings, and that you give us your time on a very busy schedule. So Mr. Mizzi.
Thank you very much, Isolina, and thank you, Vivanu. It's always a great pleasure. We have a lot of important things, but coming to a CTA briefing first thing in the morning is the most important thing. So I think it's also number 50, so it's a very important milestone of the CTA. It's a topic, I think, which traditionally we speak we make a reference to the urban and rural urban and the urbanization agenda, but we don't really go into details. And I think today's half-day session will give a bit of ideas of where the opportunities are. We as a directorate are working a lot on the urban agenda, as you know. This is primarily Unit C5. But the topics you tackle has a very overarching dimension. It's not only Directorate C, which is primarily on planet and prosperity, but it has a cross-disciplinary and a cross-cutting dimension. Whether we speak about migration flows, human capital, health, there are underpinnings which impact today's discussions. And just to recall that this topic was maybe Isolina, you know, this was the communique of the 8th Berlin Agriculture Ministers Summit 2 years ago. So it was very high on the agenda of GFFA 2 years ago. There is a communique, which I think Isolina can, it's part probably of the proceedings, because there you can have an idea of where we come from. So we come from Expo Milan. So that was almost 4 or 5 years ago, with an urban agenda and all the follow-up that stemmed from Milan. And you know all the main drivers. We speak about urbanization as being one main driver, with most of the populations now moving from a rural area to an urban agenda by 2050, probably around 65–70%. The impact of climate change, which will also have an impact on the vulnerability of rural areas and also secondary cities. So that will also have an impact. Population growth, that's a given, but also extra pressure on natural resources. So I'm also interested in today's proceedings to see how you look at the nexus dimension. We go to the European Parliament, and they want us to look more into the water nexus, the water, food and peace nexus. And so the urban agenda and the territorial approach is an area which traditionally was mentioned, but is not very well developed yet in the daily narrative when we tackle food security and insecurity issues. Clearly, innovation and research is key in this. You can't speak about employment and new innovation systems in greening cities if you don't look into issues like vegetation cover, biodiversity, organic waste management, challenges around consumption of products which are irrigated by urban wastewater treatment plants. So all this will clearly have issues which resonate from also a food safety point of view. And I think the issue of food safety is also something which you can't avoid when you speak about urban and urban agriculture. I just came from a big symposium in Rome, which was on agroecology. And clearly, the rural, urban, and the urban agenda of agroecology was also mentioned quite at length. So it's also important to see whether a different type of model, which departs from the green revolution type of approach, is an approach, one approach, not only the only approach, which can give sustainable solutions in future megacities. There was a recent article in The Economist showing how the megacities of many sub-Saharan African countries, but also in Asia, will actually increase from the current 10, 15 million amounts to 20, 25, 30 million. So that type of model of growth will also have an impact on food consumption patterns and type of models to actually feed the urban centers. Something which is clearly important when you speak about food systems is dietary patterns. So even there, I didn't capture much about the issue of dietary patterns, but whatever we do in urban agriculture also has a dietary dimension in terms of all forms of malnutrition. So from the traditional that we look at from a development angle, so stunting and wasting, but clearly the big problems that already urban cities and urban centers are confronting in most of the developing world are overweight and obesity. So even in that dimension of food systems, we have to see what type of food system is the best to actually anticipate and try not to solve, but to tackle the problems, because these urban cities will be the cities which will have big problems on public health and sustainability of public health systems and quality of health systems. So if we try to design a model, a food system, which tackles the problems of dietary and future dietary needs, this also can have a positive impact on future public health budgets. Food safety I mentioned. Something which is always mentioned when we speak about rural urban is the affordability dimension. So can you have a food system which is affordable in urban areas, and how do you skew a bit your fiscal and taxation policy systems by discriminating urban populations versus rural populations. So this is also something which one needs to look at and factor in terms of agriculture systems in urban and peri-urban. Should there be any incentives to actually stimulate proximity nodes around urban areas? And is there a risk that you squeeze out a bit the rural communities? So that's something I think which also needs to be looked at in terms of fiscal and the market incentives to stimulate urban and peri-urban agriculture. Convenience. You can't speak about urban agriculture if you do not look at convenience. So I see that a number of case studies are clearly on e-commerce. Vivanu mentioned youth. We have seen in various briefings here the potential of e-commerce ICT applications in urban areas. We speak about Uber Eat type of technologies in big developed countries, but I see this potential also in the developing world. So even those type of models will become more important in terms of convenience, in terms of also of creating jobs and also of empowerment of women in the labor market. This will clearly have a demand, maybe not in 5-10 years time, but not in 50 years time neither, of demand for convenience products which we are used to in the OECD world. And last but not least is the land use dimension. Land will become scarcer, so land development, urban and territorial planning procedures will also be a key whenever we discuss the urban agriculture agenda. So it's traditionally an area which is not looked into much detail, but it is a very complex area, and clearly I thank Isolina and the CTA for finding a topic which will clearly be a growth area, and together with the ACP Secretariat look forward to the proceedings. And I know there is always a briefing after in terms of proceedings of the book, which we will circulate to colleagues not only in DEVCO but in other parts of the Commission services. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing from the outcome from this meeting.
Thank you very much, Leonard. And we all know in this room that the European Commission and the European Union is the leading donor in the world in development. So it's always, and thanks for still helping our people in developing countries and in the ACP. So we are very pleased to continue to work with you. We will look in length at the different dimensions that you have spoke, both of you, on urban agriculture, peri-urban agriculture. Certainly from city, I don't want to repeat or preempt that. Certainly for CTA, our perspective now in our areas, intervention areas and focus, which are promoting youth entrepreneurship and employment, and of course looking specifically at women as well, the increasing the profitability and the productivity of smallholder farmers, including through, of course, digitalization. You know that is one of the key areas for CTA, and responding to climate change through sound climate smart agriculture practices are all embedded in this actually in this topic. And different dimensions on food security and nutrition, and you rightly say that it's not only food security to feed some of the urban population, which is growing, and by 2050, 70% of the world population will be in cities, in urban. So it will not all be fed, and it's not what we want to demonstrate here, by urban agriculture, but a big part certainly. And not only, as I said, in food security, but on nutrition. The complement of nutritional on fresh fruits and vegetables or dairy and so on is very, very important in cities. We are very much interested on the employment and income, and I'm very pleased that we have some young, actually, from Africa, from Kenya, from Nigeria, young entrepreneurs who have made it in urban agriculture, some using a very high technology driven, and others more on a traditional system, but all successful. And as I said, there is a room for everybody as long as it's a success. Environmental services is very important, and we will talk about that. And of course, the social function is key, and it's the same in Europe. It has really brought together different communities and addressing vulnerable groups in cities as well. So we are very interested in that. We, of course, hope in reading the best experiences across, the world that we have done in the reader you have in your folders. Certainly, we need more policy support to urban agriculture, and policy support, as you rightly say, includes also food safety, protection of markets, organization of stakeholders and value chain actors, like any part of agriculture, traditional agriculture. Is still very much, urban agriculture is still very much, at least in ACP countries, a bit at the production level, and we need much more at the processing and added value part, so that could feed very strategic, niches in products. So this is one. Technology, obviously, transfer. We will see some of the very important European cases. We have two speakers who will demonstrate what is possible on the ground and under the ground, like in London, but that requires technology investment, upfront, and we want to see how those models could be eventually transferred to developing countries, and like you said, any other organic or added value really in niche products. But our first speaker, Henk, will give a detailed overview on that. So without any more delay, I would like to invite Henk Deuze. Thank you very much. I know that you are running to other meetings, so thank you very much. Thank you. So without a delay, and I apologize, it seems a bit better, the screen, but we had a kind of, I hope the IT people are fixing, the view was not very good. It's not that important for us, but for people who are online as well. But Henk de Zee is a senior advisor at Ruya Foundation in the Netherlands. He was the previous director, actually. When I worked with him 25 years ago, I was telling him that the difference is he hasn't changed and I have, but I'm very pleased to see you back here. He has an extensive knowledge of urban agriculture in Europe, but across the world, not only Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, but Asia and other parts, which is very important, but because that's where you can compare models, you can compare successes and bring the best practices. And he has, as you would see from the biodata, detailed biodata you have in your folder, he has published extensive books and a new knowledge around the world on the different systems of urban agriculture. So we are very pleased that you give us this overview. You will have a bit more time than the others, but please, yes, do what you can in your time. Thank you very much, Henk.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I have to start this. Okay, yeah, I see now.
Just move left and right. Here.
Okay. When we started with the Ruya Foundation, and we asked officials in various countries, how do you understand urban agriculture? They normally would say to us, it's an informal, small-scale activity, mainly done by women, very low productive, in marginal lands, not very important for city to take into account, and moreover, we don't have a mandate in food security, etc., so we don't bother about it. Or it is forbidden, or we might allow it just informally. Let me see whether it works. No. It's on agricultural land, but you can also do it on hard surfaces, indoors, on rooftops. It can be micro, small scale, low tech, as well as very large scale and high tech forms of urban agriculture. It can be socially oriented, as well as semi-commercial or fully commercial enterprises. Might be individual enterprises or cooperatives, other forms. It includes production as well as processing, distribution and waste management. And it is about food as well as providing social and ecological services to the city, the urban population. So, knowing this broad character of urban agriculture, some 6 years ago, we started more to think and talk in terms of city, region, agro-food systems. It's urban agriculture, because it's often understood only as small-scale, intra-urban, etc., is misleading. It's much more than that. So, better to think in terms of city, region, food systems. But for this meeting, urban agriculture was the key word, so I'll keep talking about urban agriculture. The first question normally is, how many people are involved in urban agriculture, to see how important it is. When you look into the various surveys that have been done in the last 10 years, then you will see that in most cities, 20 to 30% of the population is involved in urban agriculture in one way or other. But in some cities, it might rise up to 80 or 90%. So the variation between cities is very high, especially in Africa. When you look into the land used by urban agriculture, you will see that a surprisingly 11% of all irrigated cropland is within the urban boundaries. And when you look at a circle of 20 kilometers around cities, then even 60% of all irrigated cropland is in that margin. So that indicates already the importance of city planning regarding agriculture in the country. The next question is, what role can urban agriculture play in answering key urban challenges? A number of them have already been mentioned. Growing food insecurity and malnutrition in cities, growing urban poverty and social exclusion, increasing impacts of climate change on cities and population, growing freshwater scarcity. It was in the news recently in various cities. They have to close down water supply because there is not enough anymore. And growing waste management problems. So what role might urban agriculture play in helping the city to overcome this kind of problems? Let's look at first food security and nutrition. Urban agriculture is very important in the supply of fresh, nutritious food to the city. So when you talk about fresh green vegetables, about milk, eggs, but also poultry meat and pork, now I have to go there. If you look, combine all the figures that are available at the moment, then you get this kind of figure, that vegetables, 30 to 75% is produced within the city region. For eggs and poultry meat and milk, it's even more. When you collect all data about the amount of food produced within the city region, so not just fresh vegetables, but what percentage of total food consumption is produced within the city, you will see that 5 to 15% of total urban food consumption comes from the city region. And when FAO asked this question to the cities, they didn't define urban. So most cities will have answered within the built-up city. So if you include the peri-urban agriculture, then probably this figure will rise to 20, 25 or even 30% in some cities. What was already mentioned this morning, that urban agriculture also enhances the access of urban poor to affordable and nutritious food. They do have food, although very cheap food, very bad quality food. So if we can raise the affordability of more nutritious food by making it more accessible, close by produced, it is important to most of the urban poor. And urban agriculture reduces the vulnerability of the whole city, of the food system of the whole city. By having food produced close to the city, you are less vulnerable for disturbances in the supply chain from the rural areas or from harbors in case of conflicts, price hikes, damaged infrastructure due to floods or droughts or whatever. Now let's turn to jobs and income. I already mentioned that in Africa, in most cities, at least 20 to 30% of the urban population is involved in urban agriculture. When we look how much income do they get from it next to food, then it is about a quarter to two-thirds of their income. That's for all involved. So for special groups, it might be much higher. And we come to that later on. When you go to peri-urban agriculture, even the traditional types of horticulture around the city, then in average, they earn more than the minimum wage level. And the World Bank analyzed different sectors in cities in Africa, and what came out as the fastest growing and most profitable sector is urban horticulture and dairy. So it's not only important in terms of food security and all that, but also for economic growth and job creation. So far we talked about food production, but there is an enormous multiplier effect. Each dollar invested in urban food production will have 1.4 up to 2.6 effect on incomes in food-related enterprises. So in transport, in processing, in compost production for urban agriculture, etc., etc. When you know that normally in rural agriculture this is about 1.4, 1.5, you see that urban agriculture in average creates much more jobs and income in food-related enterprises. Now about the urban environment. Originally it was not much discussed, but the last 5 years it gets growing attention and is very highly valued in a lot of cities. First, urban agriculture can help to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of the city. By producing fresh food close to the city, you will use less energy in transport, in cooling, in packaging, and transporting it to the city. In Almere, is a city in Holland, you see it on the right corner. They made a city planning including enough horticulture and arable farming to feed 20% of the population. And that resulted in a reduction of 16 million kilometers of transport and a reduction in energy equal to the energy consumption of 11,000 households a year. So by including urban agriculture in their city development plan, they had an enormous effect on greenhouse gas emissions and energy use. Now things are going wrong. Yeah. By enhancing the vegetation cover and green roofs in the city, also less energy will be required for cooling and more CO2 will be captured within the city. We did a city in Kesbewa, that's a city in Sri Lanka, and we found that the temperature in green areas in and around the city is 7 degrees lower than in the built-up city. So by greening, you can have an enormous effect on temperatures. In Durban, we did a study on the roof temperature. The temperature of a green roof at the end of the day is half of a normal roof. So from 41 it went down to 22 degrees of Celsius. So that has a strong impact on all the energy used in that same house underneath. And by using composted urban agriculture, less methane emissions will be obtained from landfills, and accordingly less energy used for production and transport of fertilizers. In Dhaka we did a study and that reduced each half ton of compost resulted in a reduction of 25 to 30%. No, each ton of organic waste composted resulted in half a ton of greenhouse gas emissions reduced and a reduction of 25 to 30% of use of chemicals. So these are substantial effects. Urban agriculture also helps to reduce the effects of climate change by reducing runoff and enhance the storage and infiltration of excess stormwater. In New York, after studies, they concluded that green infrastructure is the most important and most cost-effective way to manage stormwater. So now they use funds for the water and sewer infrastructure funds to invest in green infrastructure, in agroforestry, in agriculture, in order to improve stormwater management from the city. So in other areas like Freetown and Antananarivo, they have used urban agriculture to maintain flood zones free of housing, free of construction. And by doing that, they prevent high damages on housing and people living in those low areas. The same in Lima, they used it for agroforestry on steep slopes to reduce erosion and prevent landslides, and by that the effects of climate change were reduced. Urban agriculture also helps to reduce the pressure on freshwater sources. In Amman, it's a very scarce of freshwater sources. They use now a very high percentage of wastewater produced in the city to irrigate cropland, fruits, vegetables, and fodder crops around the city, up to 12,000 hectares now. So that feeds a large part of the city. And in some cities, they use urban agriculture, agroecological areas to clean up contaminated water and land. Around Kampala, you have a very large wetland, what has a very important role in bioremediation of water streams. Hazelwood is an example of a city that reclaimed 132 hectares of industrial land by planting agroforestry crops and trees in that field for a number of years and then harvested it, and they could build houses on it now. I think this is the most well-known one. Urban agriculture helps to include vulnerable groups, women without husband, with children, people without pension, handicapped people. A lot of cities have special projects for this kind of groups in order to include them and to provide them some food and income. Community development, especially in northern cities, but also in southern countries, urban agriculture projects can help to clean up derelict zones and to create a new image in the neighborhood and a new drive to improve. Most cities have groups of different sociocultural backgrounds that have their own preferred foods. Often that kind of food is not available in the supermarkets, so allowing them to grow their own food or having groups to grow that for them is very important for certain categories of the population. And more important is the role of green spaces, also agriculture spaces for recreation. People growing for themselves for leisure, farms opening up to create space for recreation on farm, etc. So knowing all this, a lot of cities have started to build programs, projects, plans, policies to develop urban agriculture in a sustainable and safe way. I try to pull together our most important lessons and shortly present it. These are all at city level. Of course, there also needs to be done something at national level. For instance, in Kenya, cities have waited for a very long time for national government to open up the possibility for them to work in this area. They were not allowed to do that. Now, 2 years ago, there is a National Urban Agriculture Act, and Nairobi is now planning their urban agriculture policy. So there's also a role for national government, but this focuses on cities. Very important is to create an institutional home for urban agriculture. Often it's nowhere. So to have a coordinating department or unit or whatever, and to have an departmental working group. It is already mentioned, it cannot be done by one sector alone. It is a multi-sectoral issue that has to be looked into by a group that includes health, agriculture, parks, social development, economic development, etc. And especially spatial planning. Establish a multi-stakeholder forum involving the main actors included in food systems is key. And that should include formal and informal sector. to jointly map and analyze what is going on in the agri-food system in the city region. Who is farming where, who is processing what, how is transport going, and what are the problems in each of these activities, and what are the options to do about it. To develop a shared vision on the desired development of the local food system. There are different interests, there are different views. To have that discussion and to come to a shared vision in 15 years, where should we go with our local food system? What are the goals? What are the changes we want to realize? And based on that, define a multi-annual strategic plan. How can we go there? What are the means and ways we will use? And remove ungrounded legal limitations on urban agriculture. For instance, in cities people want to start rooftop agriculture, and there are a lot of possibilities. If you map available space in rooftops in some cities, you end up in an incredible amount of space. But it couldn't be used because rooftop agriculture is forbidden in a lot of cities. So to open up is very important. Enhance access to land for urban agriculture. First, realize that urban agriculture is legitimate urban land use. Develop a spatial vision. What kind of agriculture we want to develop where. Don't allow pig raising next to a water source. That's creating problems. But other types of urban agriculture might well fit in over there. Agroforestry, ecological farming, etc. Integrate urban agriculture into master and land use plans. There are a lot of examples. Dar es Salaam is one of them. Protect prime agriculture land in and around the city. Still, a lot of urban development is going on unplanned, undirected, and mainly in prime agriculture land. That land should be preserved. It's very crucial for the whole food system in the next decades. Map vacant open spaces for urban agriculture in the city. There is often much more open space than planners and policymakers think. It's never been recorded and analyzed for use in urban agriculture. And that includes indoor open spaces, old offices, old factories that are not used anymore for their original purpose. Make municipal land that is vacant available for urban agriculture groups or small entrepreneurs. Reuse of factories, including UPA in social housing and slum upgrading projects. Very important. It might be full smell. One example is Cape Town, where they are rebuilding slum areas by building 2-store shacks in place for 1-store shacks. And that already creates a lot of open space that can be used for other uses. Urban farmers are often not organized, so helping them to organize themselves and to have a voice at municipal level is very important. Provide training, not only technical training, but also more on the entrepreneurial side, the marketing side, etc. Provide them very essential means, especially for poverty groups. It's very important to have minimal access to water, seed and compost and tools. For groups that are more market-oriented, access to credit, access to markets is much more important. So providing that kind of opportunities is essential. Help SMEs to start up. So a lot of small-scale enterprises have problems to get proper licenses. There are all kinds of difficult ways to obtain. Just to make it simple and the procedure short can help urban farmers already. Preferential food procurement by city agencies is a very powerful tool. So not just buy the cheapest food that you can get in the market as a city agency for your canteens and for school feeding program, but buy food from urban farmers preferential. And support research into appropriate technologies for urban agriculture. They need to farm in special conditions. People are nearby, They might be using wastewater, so you have to find safe ways to use that safely. You have to be more aware of the effects on the urban population. Support resource recovery, also from the freshwater perspective, but also to reclaim nutrients included in organic waste and urine. There is a lot of literature and experience now in how to do that cost effectively at local level. One of our partners is the International Water Management Institute. They have a lot of literature on it. It can be done. Recovery of methane from landfills to generate energy and heat for greenhouses. The use of excess heat and CO2 in cooling water and byproducts from industry and other urban sources. I think this is a very special and important area for the coming years. There is a lot of excess energy and heat and water in the city that is not used. It's just spoiled. And urban agriculture can absorb that kind of things and use it positively. In Amsterdam, they are now making a new pipeline between the harbor area and the industry there and a complex of greenhouses to heat the greenhouses and use the CO2 from that industrial area in that complex, in food production. Collection of stormwater from surrounding roofs for use in UPA. But also look into the health and environmental risks associated with urban agriculture. If you just leave it without complementary measures, you might have problems. So first, assure better coordination between health, agriculture and environment. Make an adequate zoning of different types of urban agriculture where they are allowed in the city and where you prefer not to have them because of the effects they might have, or how others might affect them, below industry streams. Farmer education, but also food vendors and consumers. We once did a study in Accra, and food was polluted more in the retail than by the farmers. So training retailers, food vendors, street food sellers, how to handle food safely is very important. Prevent land and water pollution by industry. It's a very difficult area, but it should be done, otherwise you have problems in future. Just to conclude, there is already a lot of attention also now in international agenda. There was some mention already from the Milan Pact. The new urban agenda 2016 of the United Nations also includes urban food production and processing. And there is already a lot of experience to learn from. There are documented approaches, tools, policies, monitoring frameworks, training opportunities in this field of work. Just to mention 3 resources you might use. So the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is now signed by 165 mayors already, and they are committed to apply that in their cities. So if you want examples, just go there and pick one of those 165 to learn from. The FAO Food for the Cities program assists countries and cities to improve the urban food system. Of course, they need then that the country is asking for it, and a bilateral agency that supports it in order to finance, co-finance. And the ICLEI RUAF City Food, ICLEI is a cities network, cooperates with RUAF in the city food program, where cities exchange experience among themselves and support each other, but also can get support from RUAF and ICLEI if they need so. So if you really want to share directly with other cities, this might be an opportunity to join. If you want more information on RUAF and what we have done, please go to the website and you will find our magazine and our publications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henk. That was time, but time to give us a picture that we all know a bit what is going on and the various forms of it. So thank you very much for that. We will have specific examples coming from the other speakers, but our next speaker is Dr. Axel Timpe from Germany. He's also, of course, he's a researcher, but he's also one of the contributors to the Cost Action Urban Agriculture Europe. He will tell a bit more about these European networks and bringing some of the key successes across Europe. Of course, some would be of interest also to the ACP countries, but because it's a booming, as it was said, a booming activity, especially in Europe, it was really interesting to see the best practices. You will also focus on green infrastructure, as it was said by Henk. The conversion of some of the urban spaces, historic places, and so on is very interesting. It's also something that Richard will touch in the UK and in London. So please, Dr. Timpe. And while you sit here, I would like to say also what Henk told you as resources. All of those were already included in the reader that you have in the folder. But please, if there are any missing or any from you organizations you want we include, we will have a revised version afterwards. So we will be more than happy to include more resources, networks, and so on to share. Thank you very much, Dr. Timpe.
Thank you, Isolina. Yes, it started. So, as you said, I'm a researcher and landscape architect at the RWTH Aachen University in Germany, and I've been working on urban agriculture as a researcher, but also in practice as a landscape architect. And I'm going to present today the main results of the research that we have conducted in Cost Action Urban Agriculture Europe. COST is a cooperation in science and technology, actually the longest running science cooperation instrument of the EU, and in my parallel research on productive parks, which I did as a PhD. So the cost action that we were running from 2012 to 2016 brought together European researchers, but also practitioners from cities and from agronomy and farming from 25 European countries. And what we were looking at was not vertical visions of urban farming that might be a future promise for feeding the cities. What we looked at was what is actually happening on the ground in bottom-up innovation in the 25 European countries which were participating, which you see here on the map, not only EU countries, also some associated countries to which this instrument is open, and where we conducted with researchers who are very close to the ground a lot of case studies and collected experiences from what people are doing in traditional farming in urban and peri-urban areas, but also in innovative farming concerning business models. We published it in a book with the classical chapters, the phenomenon urban agriculture, which typology of it can we find in Europe, how is the governance of urban agriculture dealt with by cities and also by self-organized communities, what are business models of urban agriculture that we have, what is the spatial dimension, mainly dealing with green infrastructure, and what is the metabolism. So Henk already mentioned the food, water, energy nexus, and urban agriculture can play a role here. And we set, together with stakeholders from the European Commission, DG Agri, a future agenda for urban agriculture, which would be possible in Europe, also by the common agrarian policy that is set up by the EU. And we had 7 case study regions with an in-depth study that we present in the book. But what I want to present today, because you asked me to which are the successes of urban agricultures, is what we learned about the 3 questions: which urban agriculture is successful in Europe, where is urban agriculture successful on which land, and how is urban agriculture successful. So for Europe, and I'm an expert on Europe, I'm not an expert on other parts of the world concerning urban agriculture, we can say for the question which urban agriculture is successful, that it is an urban agriculture which is always more than food production, which involves the people, the professional and non-professional people dealing with agriculture, and because even in Europe, where cities are not growing as fast as in other parts of the world, we still have pressure on the agricultural land. So if farmers and agricultural initiatives want to stay in place, they have to find other functions for them which are added values to food production, which is often marginalized. So we could set up a typology across the 25 participating countries of urban agriculture with the urban food gardening level, where we have individual production in allotment gardens or family gardens, but where we have more and more types of collective production also, where initiatives which have an additional motivation than food production set up educational gardens, set up therapeutical gardens, or new kinds of allotment and community gardens. But we also have the urban farming level, where professional farmers do urban agriculture in urban and peri-urban spaces, where they propose, for example, on-site experiences on the land and on their farm where they produce food, where they propose leisure services, where they propose. You don't see it.
No, we don't.
Okay, I saw it at the beginning. No, I saw it on that screen as well. But it doesn't move if I move. No. But it doesn't make.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was told you have the presentation on paper, but seemingly you won't see what I'm presenting on the screen, which is not so good, but we're on the... no,
Page
there's...
5. Yeah.
Yes, but it doesn't move.
Alec, please. Yes. I'm sorry, our IT colleagues will just address that. Apologies, we are very good on the urban agriculture technologies, but we didn't say on the computer technologies in the room. We didn't commit to that, though. Yeah. Alec is running, but Dr. Timpe, if you give some examples, it will.
I will continue with the typology where we have the professional farmers on the lower part of the slide, who produce other services than just food, who produce social services, therapeutical services, but of course we also have local food farms or farms that produce food but are paid sometimes also by the state, by the cities, for providing environmental services or by caring for cultural heritage, which we find in many urban regions, because there have been specific forms of urban farming in these areas, which are today a cultural heritage which can only be conserved if the farming continues. The second question, and there I would really like to show the maps, is where is urban agriculture successful? And Henk mentioned the importance of urban and spatial planning for it, and urban agriculture in Europe can be successful where it allies itself with urban planning and where it provides green infrastructure and public open spaces for the urban dwellers, where it gets accepted in the urban planning as an important land use because it can provide multifunctional services to the city. The key word for this in Europe is green infrastructure, which is a main strategy of the European Union. You see its definition on the next slide. Green infrastructure is a strategically planned network of natural and semi-natural areas with environmental features designed and managed to deliver a wide range of ecosystem services. And the slide that follows, it shows all the elements that are a part of the green infrastructure in the city according to the European definition. And it's multifunctional farming, which is just one component, but which is a component that is central in the green systems of many European cities. And the next slides will show that many cities invented a tool in spatial planning, which is the productive or the agricultural park. I detected 37 parks of this kind in the PhD study, where land use planning has been set up that integrates urban agricultural land to the green system. You see on the next slide that this land or these parks are of a very different size. Some of them are just 10 hectares and have nevertheless strategic positions. Some range to more than 1,000 hectares of agricultural land in the city. If you look at slide 17, which is the town I currently live in, Aachen, I think you have grayscale maps. Now we see the map on the screen. Aachen, the city where I currently live in, which has a system of green fingers coming into the city from the periphery, and the largest green finger actually is an area used by urban agriculture. On the next slide you will see this green finger system, which is important. In a city on the next slide, Cologne, the fourth biggest city in Germany, you have a green system of green rings, the inner one and the outer green belt, which is traditionally parkland, but which also contains two agricultural parks, which actually do the articulation between the city's green belt and the green corridors that go into the urban region. On the next slide you will see them a little bit more easily. And the city, of course, would like to have green areas and parks everywhere, but in today's situation of public finance, they cannot afford any longer to turn everything which is green infrastructure into parks. They need people which care for it, and these in some areas are the farmers, because if the farmers work on their land, if they care for their land, they also sustain the green infrastructure and ecosystem services that we find there. A next example is Geneva, where we also have a green corridor system, but a small productive park of 10 hectares within the rectangle, which makes the link between some or two of the main green corridors. The next slide, only with the green system. Paris, one of the most dense urban areas in Europe, where we only have patches of green infrastructure, but where one new patch on the next slide, visible and also in images later, is an agricultural area, the Parc des Lilas, where new forms of urban agriculture sustain this land use and invite the public. What do these parks look like? In Cologne, it's an example of co-design where the city and the farmers met, and they invite people to come to this area by new ways for walking, cycling, roller skating in this park, where they created vistas on the city in the background with the Cologne Cathedral, from which people can experience agriculture so that they not consider it as a marginal activity somewhere on the fringe of the city, but as an area which has an aesthetic and recreational value for them. And in some other examples, farmers really co-produce these parks. In the Ruhr metropolis, the landscape park Mechtenberg, where we have some kind of ornamental farming that creates special landscape images, but on the next slide also a kind of farming where the farmers invite people to come on their land by proposing self-harvesting fields or gardens. If you can go one back, the system is the farmer prepares the field in spring, as you can see on the left two images, and then during summer people can rent a small lot from him to come and to water, to weed, and to harvest their own food for people who live in the cities and who don't have access to their own land. So the farmer with his knowledge and his technology generates additional income. The photo shows a little bit what these areas look like, and they are as much also a meeting place between farmers and urban citizens as they are a field of production. And the last example which I show with photos is the Parc des Lilas in Paris, which is in some parts of it a classic park, a classic green space with a large alley, but which is also an area where agricultural techniques are used to manage the green spaces on the next slide, and have food production on the same time. On the next slide we see that there are some professional gardeners on the left side which produce ornamental plants directly in the heart of the park where we have the big alley. And on the next slide of this park we see that the park also offers space for gardening communities which started organic food farming inside the park, which have their own area where they produce, but where we find large public spaces for people who can walk around and maybe get interested in participating in these communities. And the last question in the presentation is, how is urban agriculture successful? How can the farmers fight against being marginalized. It is by creating innovative business models which go beyond the classic agrarian markets, which are a different kind or an additional service to food production. We, on the next slide, on this slide, have with 130 interviews with urban farmers in Europe, identified 5 business models that some of them have in common. On the left side, you see business models which you can apply more or less everywhere in agriculture. Differentiation through having different products from other farmers. Diversification by proposing more products and by having different branches in one agricultural enterprise, and low cost, of course, by producing high amounts at reduced costs. But on the right side, you have 2 business models that are really specific to urban agriculture in Europe. One, we named it the commons, where farmers in the peri-urban and the urban area open up their farms and make people come to work with them and actually to create a community around food production, which can have additional benefits like the social cohesion and so on. And the last one on the lower right is the experience model, where the farmers sell their product, but they sell also the experience to people to work on the farm, to be with them, to see how a chicken is raised, to see how a chicken is slaughtered, or maybe to doing it themselves, because in Europe many people feel disconnected from these processes, and urban farming has business models that use their search for these experiences. And I will not go into detail. The next slide shows the so-called business model canvases, which explain a little more in our book how do these activities work, which is the cost structure, the revenue streams, which is the key value proposition in the center, the customer segments, and the key partnerships. So I hope that I have given an impression on the 3 questions in this presentation, and I can finish with the message that urban agriculture research will continue in Europe. We are currently launching a Horizon 2020 innovation action on nature-based solutions in marginalized urban areas with 3 frontrunner cities: Dortmund in Germany, Zagreb in Croatia, and Turin in Italy, where we will put to a test, for example, a community-operated aquaponics system in Dortmund, where we will try to create new soils for urban agriculture with urban wastes in Turin, and where in all 3 cities we will have urban gardening projects for social inclusion, and where we will try to measure the effects of these so-called nature-based solutions. And on the last slide, the urban agricultural heritage and its way to inform the shaping of future cities would also be the subject of a conference that we will do in 1 year in Hanover, Herrenhausen, that time with a global vision with partners also from Cuba and from Japan, because when we want to make urban agriculture useful for future cities, we maybe need high technology innovations, but we also need low-tech experiences which we can find in traditional practices, and we will have a look at this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Timpen. Again, apologies for the small problems we had with the IT. I think it's more or less okay now. So our next and last speaker before the coffee break and before a bit the discussion, if you have any questions, is Richard Baller from the UK, from London, a high-tech person. I think with you, a partner, business partner, Stephen Dring, you have launched a business which is called Growing Underground, which I didn't know, but is very known in the UK, where you have for fresh produce converted some of the Second World War shelters into a production zone, which serves today most of the big supermarkets, Marks and Spencer and others, but also city restaurants and other businesses. So you will give this example as a way not only to grow fresh produce that you market daily and people have at proximity, but also linked with the other presenters on urban architecture, how you can convert new models some of the infrastructure, industrial infrastructure that we have. So thank you very much for coming from the UK. I know that you are very much business-oriented and high-tech oriented, so I know that your time is also money. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Hello, everyone. Bonjour. So can we move to the first slide, please? So the UN has predicted that we need 70% more food by 2050. That's 70% more food. How are we going to achieve this when only 10% of the Earth's surface is suitable for agriculture, and we use a third of that for agricultural livestock feed? Add to that the average age of a farmer is now currently 60 years old. We have a problem. We need to think differently about the future of our food production, and at Growing Underground we believe in building farms that shorten the distribution cycle for fresh produce to being one of many of these solutions towards achieving this. Can we go to the next slide? Wrong presentation. So, Growing Underground is an urban farm. It's situated 33 metres under the streets of Clapham, London, in a World War II air raid shelter. We use hydroponics and LEDs to produce microgreens, which are tiny herbs packed full of flavour. We pack these on site and we ship them into New Covent Garden Market, which is less than a mile away. It's one of the largest, it is the largest wholesale food market, fresh produce market in London. And from there our produce is distributed over the capital to various food service, restaurants and retailers. We power the site entirely by renewable energy, and we're working towards carbon neutrality, a low carbon economy, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So to sort of put this in perspective, there is a diagram, and if you can't see it on, it's slide number 4, if we can bring that up. So it just shows the outline of the tunnel. It's just a good way of putting this in perspective of what the size of and shape of it is. So it's a deep level shelter. There's 2 tunnels that are half a kilometre in length. There's about 6,000 square metres of space, which is about 65,000 square feet. There's 2 lines that actually go above the tunnel. That's actually the Northern Line, which is the tube network within London. So they're above us 4 stories. And in the bottom corner there's a cross section of the tunnel. So it's a round 5-metre tunnel, and there is a mezzanine floor that goes through the centre, and we use the top level for growing beds and for the farm, and then the lower level for water tanks, pumps, utilities, and that sort of thing. So the tunnels were built between 1940. If we can move, yeah, this is the slide. That's actually a video. If you can play that one, if you press start, it shows it should show it's a fly through of the tunnel. Gives a good perspective. I'm not sure if you it's actually a video. If you can press play, on it? Maybe not. Okay, I'll move on anyway. So the tunnels were built between 1940 and 1942. There are a family of 7 tunnels stretching from Belsize Park in the north of London all the way through to Clapham South in south-west London. Each tunnel was designed to house about 8,000 people during the war. And there's this amazing foresight of when they built them, of what to do with them after the war, and that's why they were built in this long linear fashion, because the plan was to link them up and have an express northern line after the express tube line after the war. That never happened. They didn't have the money, so it didn't happen. TfL, which is the transport network in London, who are our landlords, they inherited the tunnels from the government in the 1990s, and they were used for paper storage, document storage, that sort of thing. One of them actually houses, they're used for various other storage things as well, but one of them apparently houses the original Beatles 4-track recordings in a hermetically sealed box under the streets of London somewhere. So if you can put it onto the next slide, it's the one with the benefits, which is
6 slides.
6. The one before that, sorry.
There's a video.
No, it's not a video. Okay, I'll carry on anyway. So we think it's really important to integrate sustainability with business and working towards a low carbon economy. Any business today really needs to think about its impact on the environment, and this is one of the key drivers for us at Growing Underground when we set the business up. So we use a hydroponic system, which is a very efficient way of using water. It uses 70% less water than conventional agricultural methods. It's a closed loop system, so anything we put in, any nutrients, stay within that system. With conventional agriculture, that can seep through and can cause harm to local habitats. All of our waste, which is predominantly our substrate, we grow on a recycled carpet, which is designed for capillary matting for agriculture. It's very similar to the method of which a lot of us did at school, which was absorbent paper with cress seeds on the top. Basically we harvest the product, and there's very little we can do with that waste after. So we ship that into a site in south-east London. It's a waste to energy CHP conversion, and it creates energy, and then we use that to offset our carbon footprint. We are working towards carbon neutrality. Anything we purchase for the farm, we tally up. Any product, any service has a carbon embedded in that, and we tally that up, and at the end of every year we create a set of accounts based on our carbon footprint. And we're currently putting together our last sort of 4 years of that, and we're looking to offset that with reforestation projects within the UK. We also power the site entirely by renewable energy. So we use a company called Good Energy that uses 100% solar, wind and some hydroelectric. We get that across the grid, but anything that their customers use, they make sure they've got the infrastructure in place to provide that. We think it's really important to reduce our impact on climate change, but for a moment, regardless of climate change, the slipstream benefits of a low carbon economy are attractive in their own right. It's much more it's cleaner, it's quieter, it's safer, but most of all, it's much more efficient. But the main reason we set up Growing Underground was to produce hyper-local food, supplying food for the city from within the city, reducing food miles and reducing distribution models, pollution, and food waste. Producing the product within the shorter distance to customers obviously reduces that, and also this method promotes food scarcity and within the capital. So growing in the tunnel is actually a very efficient way of growing. It's got a year-round temperature of about 15 degrees. All of our micros require about 20 to 25 degrees. So as well as producing light, our LEDs produce heat, and that brings the temperature up to a suitable level, and with air ventilation at both ends of the tunnel and air movement within the tunnel, we can create the optimum temperature, humidity, CO2 and airflow to enable us to grow in the same optimum conditions year round. We don't use any pesticides either. So I want to talk a little bit about the business. So the business was established in 2012, and this is one of our early sort of test areas that you can see on the screen. We spent a lot of these early days negotiating a lease with our landlord, TfL, which was a long 20-year lease and a long process to put that in place. It was a space that hadn't been used for a long time. We also spent a lot of time negotiating with local councils around. Within the UK, we've got a business rates where you pay per square footage or square metre. That could be very high on 65,000 square feet. So we spend a lot of time with the local council, HMRC, or the VOA, which is the valuation office that's run by the HMRC, and it is a tax. And we wanted to achieve an agricultural exemption to do this. The business wouldn't have been viable without that. So we spent a lot of time in those early days pushing that through. We tried and tested on a small scale system that you could see on the picture before, that was our first harvest, first test. We sent all that product off for testing, checked there was nothing dangerous in the environment, any heavy metals or anything like that. Everything came back fine. So we moved on to the next phase, which was the picture we were on before. And that was our sort of phase 2. And there we implemented a proper hydroponic system, and we started doing yield trials, seed density trials. There was microgreens is quite a new business, and none of our competitors were going to hand that information over to us, so we had to do all that ourselves. We also use this space to attract investment, and we brought various investors. In the early days, banks and angel investors. The banks weren't lending any money at the time; they still aren't really. Angel investors, this was quite early for them, but we eventually embarked on a crowdfunding campaign. And in our first round, we ended up raising £650,000 based on the idea at that stage and just this area. And that enabled us to, from that, we actually got a lot of press and a lot of interest from around the world and a lot of investors from around the world, which helped. And we then started to plan and build the farm and how we were going to design the system that we ended up using. So by sort of 2015, we did that build, and 2016 we started to supply into New Covent Garden Market, which is food service, which is just less than a mile down the road from where we are. And then 2017, just the beginning of last year, we started to supply into the retail market. So we're now supplying Ocado, which is an online supermarket in the UK, as well as Farm Drop, which is a locally based, London-based online company. Marks and Spencer's, one of the largest retailers in the UK, and we are also supplying Whole Foods and Planet Organic, which are smaller supermarkets within London. We are planning to go into a new supermarket in the next 3 weeks. So we're currently using about 20% of the space within the tunnel. As I said, we've got 6,000 square meters, so we're using a small section of that area, and the plan is to scale that up over the next year and build into the rest of the tunnel, and try and make some efficiencies with some automation. Currently, it's quite a manual system that we're using. For example, we're using salt shakers for seed distribution, and we're using large knives for cutting that we get cut for harvesting. That will all change to a sort of a semi-automated system. Of course, we are not going to solve world hunger by selling micro-herbs to high-end retailers, but we do believe this is one small step on the journey to achieving that. in the grand scheme of things, LEDs and controlled environment agriculture are in their infancy. In the future, we're going to see that exponential growth in efficiencies in LEDs. We're going to see light recipes tailored for seeds. And technology in hydroponics and in general will see a change. The real game changer, though, is when we have an abundance of cheap renewable energy, and we can start to produce staples. All types of vegetables, but staples such as wheat, soy, maize. I mean, this is a long way off. This is, in the future, but I think this is perfectly possible with the exponential growth in technology. And then you'll see us, or various people, building large vertical farms on the outskirts of major conurbations and supplying those conurbations and allowing threatened agricultural land with soil degradation and rainforests to replenish and return back to their natural form. Hopefully this combination will see us, will help us on the path to creating that 70% more food required by 2050. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Apologies also. It will all be online for the, the ones having some images, and you have all in the folder. I hope the colleagues in the coffee break can sort it if it's possible, but very, very interesting. And of course, if you go to the UK, because I understand you don't yet export, but soon, please try the products. So we have, before the coffee break, perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the questions you have or the inputs you have, to ask either to the speakers or just to contribute yourself. If it's the case, please raise your hand, just introduce you shortly, and ask your question or bring your contribution. Thank you very much. Patrick Erland from the European Commission, then the Embassy of Madagascar, my colleague. Is there anybody else? Yes, I don't know you, but you will introduce yourself, and then we will continue. Yes, please just raise your hand. So Patrick, Madagascar, the lady here, and the lady on the left. You have to press the computer for the microphone that the interpretation works. Thank you.
Just a quick question for Mr. Henk de Zeeuw. I was wondering if he or his organization had also looked or is looking into the impact on the broader rural areas, because there is a blurring between rural and urban spaces, and so the impact can not only be, let's say, conceived in strictly urban and peri-urban spaces, because you could have, the question is, will cities be the most adapted to produce, or should they add value, for example? Should they move into transforming and adding value through additional transformation of food stuff? So there is a question of competition somewhere inherently also. So thinking in a broader agro-food system that is wider than the metropolitan area is probably something that will be necessary to make sure that we achieve a sustainability, create employment, and so on a sustainable basis at a broader scale than just the urban areas. So that's the question.
Please, Madagascar.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. J'ai une question et une...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question and a comment. The question is, it's for going underground. What's the nutritive value of your produce, since you don't have direct sunlight and you don't have the photosynthesis effect? Because we are fully aware of the fact that with technology advances are going to happen later in the day. Well, it's better to have things grow under the sun. That's the question. My comment is that urban agriculture is how much land is available and how you're going to use the land. We know exactly that land depends on supply and demand. Sometimes you have very high prices per square meter. So could you, or do you think that you can reserve some space for agriculture at low cost? So, urban agriculture was spaces which were used for other purposes before, even underground. So how can you control the land use given the supply demand and rise in prices? How can you really find space to devote to agriculture? Yes, next speaker.
Oui, je serai peut-être la première à parler en français.
I think I'm going to be the first to speak in French.
L'ONG Miel Maya, une ONG.
I represent an NGO, Maya, which is recognized by Belgian cooperation, and they supply services to the south, and including bee culture. Now, beekeeping and agriculture provides nutrition, creates jobs, and I'm wondering to what extent the promotion of urban agriculture could not involve beekeeping as well.
Il y avait une autre personne?
There was someone else down there. Please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Karinge with the Policy Center at the VUB, Vrije Universiteit Brussels. I have a question for Mr. Henk. I would like you to clarify exactly what you meant when you said that the process, the policy agenda process regarding the cities in Kenya, for example, Nairobi, is still ongoing, but there's been a hitch. Then to Dr. Tamp, to Axel, your definition of stakeholders. You talked of the people, you talked of professionals, you talked of non-professionals. Could you please elaborate more? And if you could please, within your 5 classifications of farming methods, could you please tell us a little bit more about phytoremediation? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there any other? We just take some answers for now. So please, we start by Henk, then Richard, if it's okay, and Axel. Thank you.
Yeah, the question was about where is the border between urban and rural agriculture, and whether there is no competition between the two. First, about the competition, it's not that much because the products normally are different between really rural and really urban. As I said, urban is mainly focusing on dairy, fresh vegetables, that kind of products. So staple foods and that kind of things are much less in the city, although in some cities they grow maize in the city. Secondly, about where is the border? That's the question we get from the beginning, 25 years ago. Where does urban agriculture stop? It doesn't. It depends very much the time needed to go to the market with a product. So it depends the linkages between urban and rural, where people still take the effort to go to the market or can transport products within a reasonable amount of time, and the amount of involvement of urban people in the production and the processing and all that. Secondly, as I said, we shifted a bit from urban agriculture per se to the city region food system. So it doesn't stop with the border of the city. In most cases, it is needed that the largest city involves surrounding municipalities to be part of the process in the analysis and the planning of the city region food system, because it doesn't stop at the city boundary exactly. It is a food system that doesn't have strict boundaries, and it needs to involve more people from different municipalities in order to cover the city region. I don't know whether that fully answers your question, but it's in that direction.
So I think I'll answer the. So, come on.
Yeah.
So just to answer your question on the nutrient content and sort of photosynthesis and the fact whether things are better grown under the sun. So there have been some research carried out in the States on nutritional content in microgreens, and it's come back quite positive. We are in the process. I mean, we're a startup, so we're very limited with headcount and people at the moment. But we are looking to start a project with King's College in London to look at the nutrient content of micros in comparison to fully grown herbs in the same environment. So it would be grown in our environment, because you've got to have a like for like a comparison. What I will say is that the seed, when you're actually growing micros, you're growing lots of seeds, a dense amount of seeds on a bed. And when you harvest that, the flavour is very intense. So as that plant grows, it dissipates. So you have for example, a coriander. The flavour of the coriander is very intense at micro level. But so I think we feel that the nutrition is along those lines as well. Photosynthesis. So there is photosynthesis with LEDs. That actually happens. Flavour better under the sun. It's best. All I can say is do a taste test on that. We're very pleased and happy with the taste of our product. But yeah, some people prefer things grown in soil, and maybe that is the case for some people. Just touching on the price and moving forward with that sort of space. And be able to do this in the future. The price per square metre, well, it's actually in the UK it's per square foot, which is so we pay just over £1 per square foot, which is very, very good for London. London can be anything from 15 to £20 per square foot on warehousing and within the capital, and going up to anything to £140 per square foot for office space, and so price wise it's very good. The controlling that as we move forward, a lot of the spaces we're looking at is spaces that cannot be used for anything else. So one of the reasons we got this site at a very good price from the transport company TfL was that there was very little use that they could do with that space. There's 2 fire exits, so they cannot have. They had a lot of inquiries for nightclubs, hotels, that sort of thing. They would never get planning permission, so they didn't even entertain showing people around with that. When we said we want to start a farm, the first question was how many people are you going to employ in the whole site, and that was of more interest. So there's very little use for a lot of these spaces underground because they were built prior to having legislation on fire and access. I hope that answers your question.
So I will try to answer the question on the stakeholders, and I presented this typology on the 4 years we have studied, but I think there is also some more recent developments on the stakeholders in urban agriculture in Europe, with a wave of new food councils being founded on the city or the city region level, an idea which I think comes also from the United States. And the important thing to understand about urban agriculture, and which is different from traditional agriculture, which has tried to professionalize, to think in a sectorial way, to promote its importance, is that urban agriculture is multi-sectorial. And these food councils, they try to bring together all the policy sectors which we have on a municipal level. Henki presented some of them and the importance of their cooperation. They bring in citizens who are interested in agricultural production, agricultural products from their region, and they bring in the local economy with farmers and with food processing enterprises which work with the local resources. And so the stakeholders, to promote urban agriculture, they need to cooperate and to come together, and we don't have the city department urban agriculture which can deal with it, or the NGO which can set up a food system. We need this kind of cooperation groups or food councils who set up urban agriculture and food systems on a local scale. And this is maybe also an answer to the remark from Madagascar, because these food councils, they can give urban agriculture in their city additional importance to the economic importance, because they can define we care about urban agriculture, we care about local food, we care about the land on which it is produced, and they can have an impact on the urban planning as well, so that the multi-benefits beyond the economic benefits are better valued in the cities.
Thank you very much. Henk, you had the policy processes in Kenya, and we had a very interesting remark on apiculture, if any of you wants to address it.
Yeah, I mentioned Kenya as an example that while I talked about city policies, you also need the support of national government at a certain moment in the process. A lot of cities think that food security, urban agriculture is not part of their mandate, their traditional mandate. And in some countries that is maintained very strictly from national government. So in that situation, it is important that national government takes the first step to encourage and allow and put out the guidelines in order to enable cities to develop their plans and their structures and their financing for urban agriculture activities in their cities. So Kenya now, I think in 2015 or 16, at national level, they developed an Urban Agriculture Act that allows and even encourages and obliges cities to develop an urban agriculture planning for their city region. And one of the cities that is actively doing that now is Nairobi, in the process of developing a policy together with various actors in the city. And that is very due because the first movements to get that kind of policy in Nairobi is already 20 years ago. So it took a long time just to get the formal permission and the legal setup in order to move for the city.
If you have anything.
Yes, beekeeping can be very easily part of it, and especially when you are in a spot in the city that's far from other green areas, you should even include it, otherwise you get very strange type of agriculture. And it can create biological corridors if you have a lot of that kind of spots in the city where you combine food growing with beekeeping, with livestock, etc.
I would stress that actually on self-harvesting, Axel, that you mentioned this morning. I visited last year in Germany, by the way, a very, very interesting and very successful business where you go and collect yourself the flowers in the countryside. And actually even a box where you put the money directly, there is not even someone to charge or to collect the money, and it works very well. I mean, the loss is less than what you would have in a supermarket with thefts or whatever. But it was also linked to actually beekeeping. You know, there were various examples, and I really think that, especially in cities, there are very good examples, and it should be brought together. We couldn't bring examples of everything, but I think is a critical one. And on urban, Patrick, urban and rural, it's true that it's always difficult to define where it goes, but we had a very interesting briefing last year with GIZ. I don't know if they are in the room, but and Germany being also one of the key donors in the key donors in this area, where urban-rural linkages, the urban centers are expanding much more towards rural areas. And the limit is much, much smaller, as well as with intermediate cities, secondary cities. So the boundaries themselves between urban and rural are, less neat than they were before. So do you have any other question on input at this stage with those speakers before going to panel 2? Yes, please, Angel would be one of our speakers in panel 2 from Nigeria, a young entrepreneur. Please go ahead.
Wanted to make a maybe a comment to add to some of the things that they were saying in terms of nutritional value. I think that what is left to be said is that there's been a lot of research in terms of light spectrum and what are the optimal lighting conditions for plants, understanding that it's not just natural sunlight that the plant needs, but specific light waves. So light technology has been developed because of that understanding in science and understanding the link between the academia and the private sector who are actually growing these products. So even in the nutrients that are created for these plants, a lot of it has come out of the academic space, and to be able to provide a quality product that is as good, if not better, than what is grown in traditional agricultural practices. And then I think also in this concept of urban versus rural, for a place like Nigeria where we're not necessarily doing dairy in urban spaces and other things like that, all of those are coming in at least minimum 3 hours or more. What's being done in the urban space because of poor roads, because of all these other things, is just supplemental, because even in those rural spaces, they may not be able to grow some of the items that are grown in the urban spaces. And I think when you're still developing, you still have a lot of empty spaces, you're able to take advantage of that until the city is able to meet up with the growth and development in that area. So that was my...
Thank you very much for bringing, yes, the innovation part. I forgot to mention also to Madagascar, actually, you know, the policy that, as it was said by Leonard this morning, the price is a critical part, as you mentioned. I mean, the price of the land. But that's where the policy aspect and some of the subsidies, like in other sectors, you know, to start businesses come in. So I hope it will be also covered in the second panel. Anything else before the coffee? No? So please, you have 15 minutes. So by 20 past, it would be great if you would come back by yourselves. If not, we will have to send some people to get you here. But you can bring the coffee break with you in the room. And a big applause to our very, very good speakers, despite challenges. So please, thank you very much for joining us. So sorry, I hope that now the IT system is fine. The good news is that for the people following us live, it seems that they could see perfectly. So it's more in the room that we had the problem with the screens. It looks like now it's better. So without any delay, our colleagues, ambassadors and technical people have to move from here to another meeting, so they are in and out. So I will continue just this session. We mentioned this morning that the second panel will be more on the successes from the field, especially young, in that particular case, young entrepreneurs and business people, which at CTA we are very keen, is one of our strong intervention areas now. So we will start by Angela Delaja, who is the CEO of Fresh Direct in Nigeria. So she's a Nigerian innovator, young women entrepreneur who actually works in fresh food next to the consumer, close to the consumer. She will tell us about her system of container farms that you have developed to serve your products. You are, of course, interested, although your background is not agriculture, but epidemiology, I think. You are very much interested on agriculture, but also on technology, on high-tech. So the combination of the two is one of the models we studied this morning. And you are also have been actually a lot of exposure, even international exposure. You are one of the World Economic Forum global shapers, and you mentor a lot, many of the young people. So we are very pleased to have you here, despite, again, your business commitments, and thank you very much for traveling from Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
So welcome, Angel.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yes. Wonderful. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Angel Adelaja, and I'm with Fresh Direct Nigeria, and I'm just going to talk about how we ended up getting into the stackable container farms, which we consider were modular farms for African cities. We're creating, what our vision is to create a completely off-grid, sustainable urban farming campus using 1,000 square meters to grow what should usually grow on 150 acres of land, and we're doing that in the heart of Abuja. I wanted to show you this picture because this was me just in 2013. I was fully employed and making great money in the city. I was highly interested in agriculture. And I was moved by the words of our previous Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, who said there's a need for us to diversify our economy. He also said, do agric, it pays. He also came up with statements such as, let's make agriculture fun and sexy. He also said, there's enough agriculture and money, and there's enough money in agriculture when you approach it as a business. And for me, that was a catalyst for my interest in the sector. So keywords that really helped to get youth to hear phrases that really identified with them, with the millennial generation, I guess. My first idea was to volunteer on other people's farms. I piloted a few things. I didn't like the time it took to grow cassava and maize. I tried goats. It wasn't profitable in the small way that I was doing it, but I loved vegetable farming. I loved how quickly the vegetables came up. I loved the fact that I could move from space to space, and so that's what I started investing in rural Oshun, but I faced a lot of challenges. And here, this is just a slide of some of the things that we face when it comes to food production, because when you think about the value chain for veggies at the time, most of our perishable products like the arugulas, the salad mixes, the spinaches, they were all being imported by some of the big chains. So it meant a high carbon footprint for these products. It meant that they got on a plane and then got on a truck and still faced the same issues of bad roads, maybe checkpoints, other things like that, that local farmers would face as well. And then when you look at the local farmers, they were stuck farming in rural areas. They were at the mercy of seasonality. And once they could harvest, they faced poor roads, high cost of transportation. It took them at least 3 hours to get to the market. And then we wanted to avoid all of this, if possible, and kind of get our products to market faster without losing 50% of our crops, as most farmers do post-harvest in Nigeria. And we wanted to find a solution that would help us so that we could farm year-round and reduce the loss during production, which was around 25% for our farmers. And once we knew that that was what we wanted to do, we just said, okay, let's try to focus on that. It wasn't something that happened instantly. It happened with us losing a lot of money first in the traditional farming method and realizing that we've spent so much money, we have to find a way to recoup our costs. So for us, the solution was hydroponics. And we started by testing in my backyard. I called my plumber, who is now my partner, and we started building systems. Then it was from my backyard to my bedroom, where I made indoor systems, testing out different lighting and things like that. And then from there, it was, how do we do this on a larger scale? And we thought about greenhouses, we thought about other things, and we just realized that how do we get the same yield that or better yield? Because I think one of the things that we don't focus on, especially for African agriculture, is that we keep saying we have lots of land, but lots of land with the same minimal yield is not the solution. If we can focus on improving the yield on the lands that we have, then we're able to make impact, whether it's in the rural area or whether it's in the urban area. So for me, I chose, how do I improve that in the urban area? And so in my backyard, it worked. And we grew lettuce, cucumbers, tomatoes, a few other things in the homemade systems. And that was the handiwork of Google and a few volunteer moments on urban farms in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and New York. And then our second idea was, my partner works for Julius Berger. It's a construction company, and so he works in their plumbing section. And he said they always have containers coming in and out, and when they're done with them, they either discard them or they sell them. And we were thinking about, okay, so I designed the system to fit inside the container, and I said, can we do this? Can we use local products for this? And it was yes, because at the end of the day, we didn't want to import anything. We wanted to try to use it locally because the cost of importation at that time was, I think, 500 naira to $1, and it was very expensive for us. So we now took an abandoned piece of land. We were able to trace it to the owner, who was nowhere near ready to build on the space. We did a 5-year-long lease, and the reality is that land in Nigeria, especially urban land, is expensive, especially for simple farming. When I went to the landlord, he looked at me like I was crazy. You want to use a land in the heart of Abuja for farming? He just thought I was a crazy person. We negotiated a price on the rent, and for me, the goal was, I need to make sure I can pay my rent, pay my staff, and still make a profit. So we had to find a way to maximize the yield, and for us, vertical farming was that solution. Using hydroponics and vertical farming within a shipping container, our container farms were able to grow directly in an urban area, and this meant production that was brought closer to market or at market with ease. We were able to rent a piece of land in the heart of Abuja that was less than 15 minutes away from most of our major grocery retailers and many restaurants, cafes, and hotels. We needed to remove all the trash from that empty plot, and we completed development of our first prototype in December 2015, with a harvest in January 2016. Our second container was developed in April 2016, and we had a makeshift greenhouse and a container that we used for storage. After that, we built a small team of 4. We trained 2 young women on hydroponic farming, and they learned pretty quickly, and I realized that it could scale if we could start targeting this as a job opportunity for urban youth from less privileged backgrounds, especially with the high rate of urban-rural migration. Many youth found themselves stuck in the city. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll speak a little bit slower, which I'm not used to. Yes. So many of the youth, they end up finding themselves stuck in cities. They're usually either unskilled or underskilled, and they're limited with the types of jobs they can get. So for girls, it's usually house help, nanny, cooks. For guys, they could get jobs as cooks, but they can also get jobs loading taxis or working in construction. So they have a little bit more opportunities. They can get jobs as apprentices and things like that. And so we just kept working. You can see we just started adding more containers. That's my partner, Mr. Efe. He never thought that he would get into agriculture, but he is a farmer now. And growing our team and growing our veggies, our container at the end of the day cost about $1,000 with everything, and we were able to expand our locally made controlled environment, which eliminated the problems of traditional farming, such as pests, seasonality, and low yield. We were able to produce 15 times higher yield and reduce the time that it costs in traditional farming. And that was like about 3,000 veggies in just a 20-foot container. And we were growing mostly lettuce, but we did other things like kale, arugula, Swiss chard, and other items. And so for us, it was just this whole concept of modular farming, and we were close to our market. So we went one step at a time. We increased our staff strength to 12. We added a chicken house that holds up to 3,000 birds at a time. We have 4 fish ponds that now connect to our containers, and upgrading we upgraded to a fully ISO compliant 3-container kitchen with bubble washer, industrial salad spinner, salad dryer, package sealers, and more. Most of all, we were able to scale our customers, getting into 2 major grocery stores, 2 hotels, and over 7 different restaurants and cafes. We developed an online grocery store platform, and so that people can purchase our products, and we do delivery to them. That helped us to kind of mitigate this whole issue where, people would order, then you get there, and then they didn't want it again. But with the online platform, they pay online, so they at least know they have to collect, because I think for us at the time, online purchases were also something that we're getting people to get into and understand, especially for their groceries. We also had 2 delivery keke tricycles. They're like in other countries they call them tuk-tuk, I think, or something, but we call them keke, and we were able to get to our customers much faster as well. We even started a line of cold pressed juices as well, because we have the kitchen that can do much more with our products. We were able to start an urban farmers network, which is a community of urban farmers and ag enthusiasts to meet up, share information, ideas, work together, get training, and also to find markets. And we're over 200 strong in the group, using mostly WhatsApp to communicate daily. And we have monthly meetings and trainings on things ranging from hydroponic farming and urban garden planning to mushroom farming and livestock rearing in urban spaces. And one of our members is the SPAR franchise in Nigeria. Their general managing director of the entire group. He's on our platform because he took such an interest in what we were doing as urban farmers, and he saw the benefit of how SPAR in Nigeria could benefit from having a collective cooperative of farmers like this. So that's been very, very helpful to us as a group. So we've come a long way, but we've also experienced setbacks. Such include losing our office container with sensors, seeds, pumps, and other equipment to a fire. We've experienced Fulani cattle herders in the heart of our capital city, and we've had to put up a fence because of that. Other things that have become an issue are urban regulation and land use, especially when you need to get approvals. But I think the most difficult issue I will say and stress on is the issue of electricity. Because of the epileptic light situation in Nigeria, as a business owner, as a farmer, especially when you focus on this type of farming, you cannot function or scale your business without adequate electricity. And that's why in the beginning when we started, we didn't think about being off-grid, but now we've decided to say, okay, we can't rely on this feature, so we need to find a way to solve it ourselves. But this doesn't deter us from our goal. We envision a 100-container facility with indoor and outdoor grow spaces that fully maximize the land space. We want to turn 1,000 square meters into 150 acres worth of produce. And at the end of the day, we need to start from somewhere. So this is where we are at the moment. And we've scaled from 2 to 10. However, we've only fully kitted 4 of those, and the others are still in progress. So either they have the piping but not the lights, or they have the welding but not the piping, and things like that. And we want to create a place that employs over 200 urban youth, where they can have not only to learn about hydroponic farming, but also learn about leadership development, to learn financial literacy, tech skills, and other soft skills, because I noticed that my team, they have a lot of time in the day in between the things that they're doing. So we feel that adding value to them is also very, very important, because at the end of the day, it's about growth. And we're focused not only on providing dignity in labor, but just a well-being and overall growth as well. Ultimately, our next step is scaling our Jahi facility, which is the one in Abuja, as well as developing a management app to help reduce human error and find a way to give youth access to phones, internet, and technology. This would be able to, with the app, we'd be able to help Nigerians not only to grow the products, but for other Nigerians to also invest in each container, as well as support youth and urban farmers. Our app is currently in development, and it gives daily task reminders, measurement tools, crop inventory management, and aids interactive learning with troubleshooting and tutorials. This helps to keep youth from failing in an otherwise difficult sector, and through informed decision making with an extensive data on a variety of crops that the container can accommodate. On the other end, we have an interactive agricultural investment platform for those interested in sound and tested investments in the sector via Fresh Direct Container Farms, and one can fund their wallet, choose containers to invest in, get to know who the urban farmer is that's managing the container, and get to see real-time visual surveillance and reports of planting, harvesting, and sales with a guaranteed return on investment. So for us, the model includes everyone in this urban farming initiative, from the youth to the investor to our community and our customers. And I think that for us, it's a solution that Nigerian youth are looking for, and we hope that can scale to other African cities, maybe Lagos, maybe Dakar, Accra, Abidjan, Nairobi, as well as Addis Ababa. And our experience is just like as a small venture, because I think in many of the developed countries across Africa, we would be able to use this kind of technology to strengthen our African food systems. But I'm one of many. There's so many others who are doing work like this. Many of us are engaging youth through urban farming. We're doing the modular farming and container farm way. However, we look forward to the agricultural renaissance that is flourishing, and believe that the overall nexus of an agriculture, technology, and communities will breed success and opportunities in urban farming for African youth. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angel. That's a very inspiring story, and thank you for sharing the success and some of the failures to get you there, because it's true, the business, sometimes we just see the end of it and not all the difficulties that you have to go through. But it's also very encouraging to see that it offers real opportunities for young people and young farmers. And as I said at the beginning, being CTA being now with Akina Desina, but as a president of the African Development Bank now, certainly it made a difference. As a Minister of Agriculture, we know that well, and it's one of the successes. So our next speaker is Miss... alors, peut-être en français, comme ça va changer un petit peu.
Perhaps I'll switch to French to change things. Mrs. Koubali Diaw from Senegal. Well, she's based in Senegal at least. Works for the FAO. I'll let you put your headphones on. Mrs. Koubali Diaw. She's come specifically for this briefing from Dakar. She travelled last night, and after having worked in Rome, she now works in Dakar on microgardens and urban agriculture in Senegal and in Western and Central African countries. What we'd said is that you would be telling us about the successes of this type of experiment. We typically talk about urban agriculture in terms of communities and less in terms of hydroponics and vertical agriculture, although that's also out there. But it's something that's fundamental in the region, to say the least. Thank you for having come, and you have the floor. Thank you, Isolina. Ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm going to be speaking French, and I'm going to be telling you all about this mini garden experiment we carried out in Senegal and that we have expanded towards other African cities with technical support from the FAO. Now, every time I present these micro gardens, the first question that comes up is, what do we mean by that term? So every time I do this presentation, I explain what's meant by that. This is something that stems from the Food for the Cities FAO program. I think one of the speakers referred to that earlier. And there's a strategy that was developed under that program. In this strategy, you find the green cities development concept. This is a system that's supposed to promote sustainable development of urban and peri-urban horticulture in order to support food and nutritional security. The challenges we face have to do with malnutrition and increased population growth in urban centers. We've noticed that African cities grow much faster than cities elsewhere in the world. This FAO Green Cities Development meets at least 5 strategic objectives. Objective 1 is to secure access to land and water for irrigation, and includes these spaces in the planning of the cities and identifies and saves water for water. This is a fundamental issue, especially in African cities. There's a safeguard the health quality of products and protect the environment, all the while defending a whole a series of elements in the value chain. Goal 3, to secure the appropriation of the sector by partners and players, with a whole follow-up done there. To secure opportunities, and this amounts to local markets, nutritional education at schools. And 5, we secure political commitment in an institutional context. There's a local authority program with this Green Cities program, and a coordination unit is set up at local level. Now, what's a micro garden? It's something that's adapted to cities and to high density neighborhoods with no space around dwellings. The main beneficiaries are foremost poor families who own no land in urban environments. The main players are women and children, and the objective is to make fresh produce available on a daily basis for these households, so that they can have these available to eat and sell. The criteria, the requirements to set such a micro garden up is 1 to 10 square meters of spare space, at least 6 hours of sunlight a day, and a source of clean water. And the prototype you see on the picture is a table made of recycled wood that you make available to those households. Other recycled materials can be used, for example, buckets, flower pots, anything that can be used for a micro garden. And there's the soil that's used. You can see, actually what we use in Senegal is peanuts, the outside of peanuts. What you need is this to be hard, and make sure you have something that can allow the plant to grow. So, like peanut shells, for instance. Now, on this picture, you've got a number of possibilities on the same table. So on a 1 square meter table, you can have 1 to 4 different types of fresh fruit and vegetables. Another advantage is that you produce at home and you are able to have healthy, vitamin-rich produce available on a daily basis in order to combat the risks linked to malnutrition. It also can generate modest income source. Now, the context. This allowed us to strengthen resilience to malnutrition at household level. But we also realized that these products could be sold. Now, the Milan-Dakar project. The first project to be officially set up after the first table was sent from Colombia in 1999, together with the Directorate for Horticulture, went from 2006 to 2014. When the first table arrived in 1999, with support from the FAO and the cooperation of the Ministry of Agriculture via the Directorate for Horticulture, the first thing that was done was to carry out training activities to tell people how you use such a table, how do you feed your plant. Basic training for households to tell them how to use their microgarden. This generated political commitment on behalf of the mayors of Milan and Dakar. Dakar and Milan have been twinned for over 40 years now. The mayors of the two cities decided to implement this project together with the FAO and the Directorate for Horticulture. Also, in some cases, with an Italian NGO in Accra who took a role in the process. And two main phases took place between 2006 and 2014. Consolidating the microgarden initiative at the Dakar municipality level, with expansion towards Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gambia. The city-to-city initiative started during the Milan-Dakar project. This is a pilot project for the implementation of microgardens in Praia, in Cape Verde, in Douala, in Cameroon, via South-South cooperation. The main objectives overall: consolidation and ownership of the microgarden project by its players and partners all along the value chain in Senegal and especially in Dakar. Ensure the training of a greater number of beneficiaries in cities. Setting up a process to facilitate and guide the integration of experiences bearing on microgardens in order to support food security and nutritional security in urban areas, and to support the regional expansion of such initiatives in Burkina Faso, Niger, in Niamey, and in Gambia, in Cape Verde, in Douala. And to strengthen the involvement of local governments in food systems in order to ensure the food and nutritional security of cities via South-South support mechanisms. The results obtained now during these three phases. In Dakar, 24 trainers, professional trainers, were trained on microgarden techniques, on producing compost in order to get organic inputs for farming. They were also trained in organization. Between 2006 and 2016, 9,684 beneficiaries were trained. Over 8,000 growing tables were made available to the beneficiaries, or have been made available since the beginning, because after each phase, participants go home with at least one such table, a growing bed, if you will. 49 community production centres have been set up, 16 centres for training and demonstration have been created and are spread across the 19 municipalities in Dakar. The space has been made available for free by the Dakar Town Hall. Now, decentralization based on Objective 3, in order to make municipalities autonomous, allowed us to set up 49 community production centres. We've also set up a group purchasing organisation in Dakar. The beneficiaries of these training activities, well, 80% of them are women, and a significant amount of them, 50%, are below the age of 36. Originally, the people targeted were the most vulnerable parts of the population, persons with disabilities, inmates, and the elderly. But during the third phase, many young people took part in the process and took part in the training. Now, the setting up of these micro-gardens came hand in hand with educational support in schools. We engaged with 27 schools. The first thing we do was first to train them on training. We set up a training corps, as it were, with some 20 teachers and a couple of students. We set up a couple of tables at the schools and let them manage their own micro-garden themselves. So we created our group purchasing organization, and this was a very important moment towards the end of the third phase in 2015. The selling process was so accelerated that we needed such a GPO, group purchasing organization, for the micro-gardens in order for inputs to be available, because it wasn't always easy to get these peanut shells that we use and the inputs we need to feed the plants. And this GPO was used to store inputs and peanut shells and wood as well. The wood to build these beds, the tables. Dakar held a forum on urban food policies linked with the Milan Pact on food policy. We seized this opportunity. 16 African cities were represented in Dakar together with Milan, and we seized this opportunity to inaugurate our group purchasing organization. Now, on a political level, this is something I was saying earlier, the political part of this is very important, and I think this was mentioned. The political involvement of local authorities is very important. If municipal authorities don't take part, then it's much more difficult to implement things. And Dakar really took ownership of the process, because this micro-garden initiative, together with a management unit integrated as part of the socio-economic program of the town, and together with its 19 municipalities, Dakar, together with the management team, set up a team of 24 managers, 19 women and 5 men, and they are the trainers who went to other African cities to set up the micro-garden program in those cities. It was thanks to this political commitment that the spaces for the 12 training and demonstration centres and the 49 community production centres were made available. Same goes for places for access to water, etc. There was also a possibility for a web presence via this political commitment. Now, at the sub-regional level, this process meant that in every town, we organized the Train the Trainers activity. Each such activity brings together at least 5 representatives who are experts in urban or peri-urban farming. And every time we do this, we have such a Train the Trainers activity. Then, with those technicians, Dakar goes back to each town to set up a demonstration and training center, and to set up a teaching unit, at least in one primary school in one of these cities. And these sites are made available by governments, especially local authorities. Now, the results obtained in other African countries. 242 people trained in Burkina Faso, 199 in Bangui, 199 in Banjul, 20 in Niamey. What emerges here is the ownership that cities manage to gain out of this, how they manage to own the project. We also carry out training on urban agricultural policy. There's also support that's made available to local structures, as well as support services for agricultural and urban and peri-urban agricultural activities. But we also carry out efforts in order to integrate them in the master plan for food in Dakar. Now, prospects. The project has now come to an end, but our prospects for the future are autonomous micro-gardens and expanding the system to other African cities. First of all, other cities in Senegal, or towns in Senegal, because there's very high demand, and here we establish a link between urban and rural environments. Rural environments that are becoming more and more urban. The closest city to Dakar is Kies, where there's very high demand, and Kies is becoming more and more urban. Other African towns are interested in support to develop micro-gardens in their towns, and even in Eastern Africa, Nairobi is one of them. They're making a request to the FAO. Nigeria is also making such a request. And our prospects would be to support city authorities, town authorities in their planning in order to set up lasting urban agricultural systems hand in hand with the municipal authorities, and these have links with international declarations that can represent support for local authorities to develop peri-urban and urban agriculture. Now, the value of microgardens in a political context with regards to topical matters. This is something that's linked to current political relevant issues. Migration, for instance. Microgardens can help people who have stayed in the country to have a range of vegetables available, and it can give them an income. And it also halts the rural migration phenomenon. In Dakar, for example, in Kies, we've actually stopped people moving away from Kies to Dakar. For populations hit by disasters, again talking about Brazilians, or affected by socio-political conflict, microgardens can give these people access to local and diversified vegetables back. We're talking about something where you don't need to have transport or preservation. Your the table can be right next to you on your terrace. Beneficiaries will just use the products they need. So you do away with a certain amount of waste here. For nutrition, a great variety of minerals and vitamins made available or by these vegetables, and this can combat nutritional issues in some neighborhoods of Dakar, and the FAO very much insists on this aspect. This picture now. This is this demonstration and training center that's set up at the center of Dakar with a safe perimeter where women can grow these products, and the surplus is sold and used for other occupations. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Dia.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Diao.
Before the closing and the lunch would be Peter Chege from Kenya, the CEO of Hydroponics Kenya. So you started the business in 2002. You started more by providing fertilizers and soil analysis to the farmers, and then progressively you moved by providing hydroponic systems to farmers' communities in Kenya. So you will share that experience with us now, and thank you very much as well for coming from Kenya to share that experience. Peter? I would like to remind you as well that we have our interpreters. Thank you very much for your work already until 1. So after 1, we will not have interpretation. So it will be great if we finish on time. Thank you, Peter, please.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. As you have heard, my name is Peter Chege from Kenya. I'm a CEO of Hydroponics Kenya. And I'll start with a short video, then I will continue.
My name is Peter Chege, and I'm CEO of Hydroponics Africa Limited. We are promoting a project called Vertical Hydroponics for Household. This project has been funded by USAID through a program called Securing Water for Food. This system uses 30 liters of water per day. It only uses a space of 20 meters square, and it has 720 crops. It can be able to feed 4 to 5 members of the family, and also farmers able to sell the produce so that they can be able to repay the system. The cost of this system is only 20,400, and farmers don't have to pay 100%. They just need to pay 20 to 50%, and the rest they pay as they start harvesting. With our farmers whom we are going to impact in Eastern Kenya, we expect even to get more farmers so that at least we can ensure food security in Africa. So far we have been able to install 10,000 meters square of vertical hydroponics in both the rural and urban dwelling. And the following slides are on our systems which you have developed. As you can see, we started this pilot in Nairobi, Kenya, whereby we were supposed to impact 200 women in Nairobi, middle of the city, with several hydroponic systems. The ones you can see in the
background is, we call it hydro wall. It is mounted on walls of the building. So we also call it gardening without a garden, because if you are in a slum, women, they just have their house. One side of the house can be used to grow the vegetables for the household consumption, and the other sides they can also use for selling the vegetables. The system, we just need to open the tap, and the water finds its way to all the crops, and then goes to the reservoir, which can also be recycled. We also did several pilots on urban schools in Nairobi. Like now, this one is Moi Avenue in the middle of the city, whereby the students were able to learn. The primary school student, we did a pilot with them, and we realized that children are also eager to know how crops grow. And you know now, many people have migrated to urban, and it really becomes very hard for them if they don't know how where the crops come from, and it's a good learning for them. That's a vertical system that we offer. It is usually 2 meters high, and we also think of whether now we can go even about 15 meters, whereby now we can have artificial lighting, and this one will ensure that cities feed themselves, because if you can go 8 meters square, you go 15 meters high, then you are sure of that you are going to feed many people. In Africa, the best thing in Africa is we have lighting is very huge. So in our 2 meter height, we don't require artificial light. So it's easy for us to develop vertical hydroponics in Africa than maybe in European countries because of lack of light. You still are the schools learning in the Moi Avenue primary, and this system we try to semi-automate it because it has a pump which is 0.5 horsepower pump, and it's timed. So it waters the crops at a predetermined intervals. So even the students, they still continue learning, and then they come and watch their crops. They just need to make sure that the reserve of the nutrients, the water is there, so that the pump can function well. As I have said, we've impacted 200 women in Nairobi. Those women at 18 meters square, which is able to feed 5 to 6 members of the family, and they are able to sell so that they can sell the excess, so that they can be able to repay the unit. Because initially what we did, the pilot, we are testing whether if we give at a credit model, whether the women will be able to repay the cost of the hydroponic system, which is 18 meters square. And we learned that they are able to be within 8 months, they are able to pay the cost of the system, and then the rest of the months then they can use for the income. And as you can see, we are using those pipes, and the lifespan is about 10 years. So imagine now they will be able to be growing the crops within that period. This system, we call it set it, forget it, because it's also semi-automated. It has a timer, so it waters the crops, and the water goes back to the reservoir, then it can be recycled. So if that system uses 80% less water, it uses very minimal labor, and it can also be on rooftop. It can fit anywhere. You actually say that even one pipe to feed one person, we've done a research that if you are using the spinach, you need just 15 spinach. So imagine how many spinach can be fed by this small system, which uses less labor and also less water and less space as well. That's why I've said that in 18 meters square, per meter square, we are able to multiply 6 times if you go vertically in only 2 meters high. So if you go higher than that, then you can imagine how it's possible to feed the cities. That one is the one I started with. That is called hydro wall, which can be mounted on the frustrated buildings or factories. I had one of our panelists say that. It can be mounted on fences. It can be on houses of dwelling. We call that system A-shaped. It's A-shaped like this, so that at least light can be enough, so that at least we don't use artificial light, because you know in Africa also light is an issue. Electricity is very expensive, so we need to develop systems which is cost effective, and hopefully maybe somebody with the innovation of maybe solar, automating this hydroponic system with solar in Africa would be very much feasible. That's what I started with, is fodder for for feeding livestock. It takes only 7 days, as opposed to 12 weeks if you do conventionally. And then it's also grown vertically, and it has a water and the nutrients recirculate the system. So in a very small space, we also be able to grow fodder for all livestock, and very economical, and as well as use less water. So far, there's some lessons we've learned since we started, and I have about 5 lessons. The first one is integrated approach to implementation of activities at household at the community levels, as well as awareness and advocacy, increases impact of intervention. The other lesson is working with the Ministry of Youth, county government, and Ministry of Education was also useful to target awareness activities such as sport song and the drama performance, so that at least we can bring in youth in this industry of farming. There is need of training while introduce farmers in urban. As you know, farmers, most people in urban, they don't know how to farm, and you have to train them. It's also been a new technology. We faced a lot of challenges here because people used to say now the fodder growing within 7 days, crops growing 30% faster, and then you are not using soil. Then people in Africa would say this is GMO, and so we had to train them and make sure that they know this. We are trying to grow perfect crops because we believe in hydroponics you are able to almost achieve a perfect crop. The other lesson is automation and app application of hydroponic system in Africa will encourage youth to participate, ensure management efficiency, and manage credit model. Because we have realized that unless now these youth they are given some loan by microfinance so that they can be able to buy the hydroponic system, it will be very hard for them to adapt. And you know, in Africa, banks are shy to give loans to farmers because of unpredictable prices of the fresh produce. So if you have an app application whereby now the system is automated and also it has an app, and if a farmer is given this system, he is reminded that he is supposed to pay, and to some extent if he is unable to pay, then you can switch off the automation, and that one reminds him now you have to do that. Because we really had a problem when we started with the credit model. So the default rate was high, and we understood this because of the lack of fresh market. And also now with this app development, it's also going to link the farmers or the youth to the fresh produce, so that to the supermarkets and everything, so that at least they will be able to know now this is the price of this fresh produce and this how much is, so that they know where to take their produce. They also need, and this has been a big challenge because people would call me and ask me, now, is hydroponics organic? And to me, I think it is need to certify hydroponics as organic, because right now, as we are using organic hydroponics nutrients, and you know, because we are not using soil, then there's no soil-borne diseases like nematodes, bacteria root. So to me, it's more a perfect crop if you are using organic hydroponics nutrients. So there's need to certify hydroponics as organic, so that at least it can be adapted. Because we've all realized that hydroponics and aeroponics is the solution to urban agriculture because of lack of space. So thank you very much. And
thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Very interesting. So we can take some questions, some comments, some contributions to the speakers. So take the opportunity, also as they have come from far, to share their experiences. I have one myself, actually, to the speakers, not talking about failure, but about success. What is about the percentage of success being the micro gardens or, you know, hydroponics in Kenya that you reach at the end, you know, because not everybody adopting it will succeed. But after, indeed, the training and the capacity building, you would have more. But I would like to have a sense of, you know, a kind of idea of how much successful they are, or the people who adopt in a sustainable way, you know. So are there comments, questions? Yes, please. So I see 1, 2, in that order. Anybody else? Okay, we take the, yes, 3. Okay, so please, sir, we start with this first round.
My name is Faya Bouquet, and I'm from Liberia. I want to look at the context of nutrition. Specifically, the question is to Inger from Nigeria. Are there any gaps between producing crops hydroponically or in the continuous than those ones that are produced on natural land by farmers? Also, will you say that the level of successes you've had in Nigeria, is it the same in other ACP countries as well, with regards to the seasonal pattern, the climate change issues in other countries as well? Thank you.
Namibia, right?
Thank you very much, Puitsokon Sabele, South African Embassy, Brussels. I just wanted to thank you for the excellent presentations. I thought they were quite thought-provoking and with lots of opportunity to assist with dealing with the question of youth unemployment in Africa. And with that, I think Peter mentioned just one of the issues with regards to access to finance, but I thought perhaps you could help us understand what are the big constraints that young people face in adopting this sort of approaches in agriculture, and in your own view, what is the way forward to ensure that we can replicate this throughout the African continent? Thank you.
Thank you. There was a third one there. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Merci. Moi, c'est Innocent Compaoré de...
My name is Innocent Compaoré from Burkina Faso. I wish to thank you for this initiative. I learned quite a lot. I now see that in the presentations they talked about plant production mainly. So did you experiment with livestock production? Because I produce fish, I grow fish, and I've been closely watching at what has been done in Nigeria, in the suburbs, particularly because Nigeria is a large producer of catfish in Africa. So those are very good examples to show how people can grow fish in towns and supply the urban market. Thank you very much.
Is there any other? Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for that question. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, I'm from Madagascar. My question is mainly about the water. Because we've highlighted urban agriculture, but from the start, I wanted to ask this question. What about the quality and quantity of water? Because when you're talking about cities, there's pollution. What measures need to be taken to ensure that the water is clean enough for agriculture? And also what needs to be done to provide the proper quantity of water for plant growth? Thank you very much. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for those questions. I would now like to call upon the panelists to answer the questions, or if anyone else wants to add something. Do you want to start, madam? Thank you, Isolina. First of all, I'd like to deal with your question regarding success stories. What percentage of success stories you've had? Well, the initial phase was simply training a few households on how to manage a mini garden. They just had a few tables, but the process went beyond the framework of the project, because the city took ownership of the project and provided areas for the project in 12 communes. So 12 centers were set up and they were sort of demonstration centers where you had two professionals and they received technical support from the FAO experts, and they are there to answer or deal with any training issues. But these centers are also centers which carry out mini garden production. They produce crops, and they give you the standard type of table to grow food on. When we saw that the process was growing very rapidly, we carried out an impact assessment over the past 10 years, and the percentages are the one I shared with you just now. 80% success, mainly done by women. We carried out an impact assessment as regards food security and nutritional value. So we wondered whether mini gardens really feeds families. Yes, partially. Because women have been working on the profitability of the product. For example, I have my tables with my vegetables and my salads, but the women who are in the center, they grow spices, mint, parsley, so that they can sell their surplus, and then the money is used for education in the family, educating the family. Well, I'll share the impact assessment report that we did, but it shows that as far as security, food security and nutritional value, we have achieved our targets. Thank you very much for the documents you promised to share with us. These documents will be online.
South Africa Embassy, specifically on the youth, the constraints that youth face. Could Angel and Peter, as young people, answer those, please? What are the main ones that you see for you, but of course for African?
Sorry, between the translations, I was a bit confused. You're asking about some of the challenges that the youth may face in adopting what it is that we're doing. Definitely, the gentleman from South Africa talked about access to finance, and I think whether traditional farming or for us, the type of farming that we're doing, hydroponic farming, when you have a situation where most of the youth don't own land, and in Nigeria, you need landed property to get loans. So it's very, very difficult to get the type of capital. Sometimes you can get microfinance, but the amounts are so small sometimes. So it may help you to start up something small, but you want to be able to make enough. Sometimes the economics of scale aren't there. So being able to look at other assets, look at the equipment as an asset, things like that, that's helpful. I think also in terms of the education, a lot of people assume that you need to be highly educated to learn these things. The girls that I work with, all of them have secondary school degree or below. Nobody has above that, but they're able to learn within 1 to 3 months, not only hydroponic farming, but fish farming, chicken farming, and other things like that, mushroom farming, and also learn to train other people in our urban farmer network. So that's helpful. I think the other aspect is being able to make spaces available. So, for example, our Urban Farmers Network is looking to see how we can take spaces within the city that are empty. Just to put it out there, the Belgium embassy in Nigeria has a plot of land that is available and it's empty and they're not using it. So something like that would be beneficial for youth to be able to utilize that space, come together as a cooperative. I think also in terms of organization, there's a organization called COLECP, that helps farmers who want to be able to get their product to standard. And I mean, it's not just for export, but I think when your product is to standard within the country, it means that being able to be taught about good agricultural practices, what you should and shouldn't do, what gives you a quality product. You have now more access to grocery stores like ShopRite, Game, Spar on a larger level because they come, they check your facility. You know, one of the biggest burdens for me was before I got the kitchen that I have now, the old kitchen was not ISO compliant. So we needed to make sure that we got a small loan from a friend. He invested that money, and then we were able to get that kitchen, and that helped us to repay that. So those are things, and I think the other gentleman from the UK mentioned crowdfunding. What we like in Nigeria, if the money's not coming to us, government may not provide the money, banks may not provide the money, the big men with all the money and nice cars may not provide the money. But if we can find ways to use technology to be able to crowdfund and get people who are interested in agriculture but don't want to actually do agriculture to invest in bite sizes, then it's something more palatable for a young, upwardly mobile person to invest in a farmer when the data is there. So I think that other thing is being able to have the data for people to be able to develop these kind of models. So.
Okay, in order to devolve hydroponics to other African countries, one thing is about the policy makers, because it has taken me now 1 year to take hydroponics in Rwanda. We had a very good agreement with the Rwanda Agriculture Board, but then the custom for me to take my organic hydroponics into Rwanda is becoming very hard because there's no standard for that, and it has to be gazetted and everything. And then also to take my inert media to Rwanda. Although now we did try to use organic, local materials. The other thing is, being a new technology, it has to have demo farms. You first of all start with the demo farm so that the youth can come and learn, and then involve youth in the whole food chain, because it's only hydroponics by itself cannot be able to help the youth, because they also need to have access to the market so that at least they can have access to the microfinance. Because as I said, that the reason why banks are not coming is because they are not sure whether these youth are going to sell the produce. And you know, hydroponics has a predictable, guaranteed supply of food throughout the year, because it does not depend on land-fed agriculture. So it's very ideal. It can also even grow herbs for export or also for the local. So it's only that we have the demo farms, we get the youth trained, and then you create the good business model for them. That's the only way I think they will be able to have the youth come in Africa to be able to adopt urban hydroponics.
Thank you very much. I don't know on water. Yes, please, Angel.
I wanted to be able to talk about that aspect of quality of water, and then also nutritional gaps. I'll kind of lump them together. In terms of water quality, when you're looking at, I think we had this conversation earlier about having farmers that come from rural areas that are using spaces available to grow. In Nigeria, sometimes you'll see some farmers on the side of the highway, the expressway, farming locally. The water that's coming from runoff or coming from the sewage and things like that, you're not able to control the quality of that water. I think that's where training needs to come in to be able to, and not just training, but helping them to understand why it would be bad for them would help them to understand why it would be bad for other people, because sometimes they're growing things that they're not even eating. So, you know, at the end of the day, them to be able to understand. But with what it is that we're doing, we have a closed loop system. So the water that when we started, we didn't have any access to water where I was. So we have these guys called Marwa. They carry water in the neighborhood for people who don't have potable water in their neighborhood, and you buy it for 50 naira for a 50-gallon, 50-liter jug, right? And you use that. So we would buy what we need and have that cycling through our system when we first started. Now we have a borehole because we've been able to make enough revenue to invest in a borehole. But in places where you're in the city but there's no infrastructure development for access to water, those are things that we face. But being able to make sure with our hydroponic farming that our water is controlled, the water source is clean, the nutrients that we're using are good. And then also in terms of nutrients, you asked about the nutritional gap versus traditional farming. And one thing I love about, I come from a science background. And so the reason that I was drawn to hydroponic farming is because of the fact that it's so driven by science. It's so driven by looking at agriculture as a science and saying, what are the variables that help to give you an optimal plant? What are the nutrients that come from the soil? You can't say, oh, it's just the soil that the plant needs, but there's something inside the soil. That's why we still have bad soils in certain countries where you have soil, but the plants are not growing. You're not getting good yield. There's a reason why people are using fertilizers. So I am seeing in Nigeria high use of fertilizers. So I feel more secure using organic hydroponic production or aquaponic production than using eating products that may be used with high levels of fertilizers that people are not even regulating, and they're coming into the country in funny ways anyway. So for me, I see the nutritional value being that the customer is able to trace where their food is coming from, when it was produced, how it was produced, and with what. So for us, that becomes, and our customers come to our facility, they can see what it is that is growing. And then I think there was another question about animal livestock. Yes, we're doing chickens, we're doing fish. We did catfish and tilapia. We failed on the tilapia. We had very, very small fish, but the catfish was very easy and there was market there. The chicken was very, very helpful to us also because at some time we were testing out using compost tea, which was just liquefied compost in our systems versus aquaponic system versus a organic fertilizer system, and so we've been able to see how that can be beneficial as well. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And I have to say for our colleague from Burkina Faso that indeed we could just bring some cases, but the animal and aquaponics is very, very important. So I hope that in another opportunity we can bring some of those cases. If any of the speakers, Henk, I give you the floor, and any of the others want to just give the last words before our interpreters run away, please, Henk.
Yeah, just to add on the issue of quality of water, because I want to prevent that you think that you can only do urban agriculture with potable water sources. That would be very scarce and very expensive. While in many African cities there are a lot of vegetable growers that use wastewater. Just to give the example of Bulawayo, the city government already for 20 years supplies domestic wastewater to a large scheme where hundreds of farmers are growing with wastewater without any problem. What is required is to do proper training in how to manage wastewater when you use it in agriculture. There is a lot of documentation on this kind of cases and guidelines that you can use how to safely manage wastewater in agriculture. So don't go only for fresh potable water. The other thing is there is a lot of treated wastewater that comes from the plants that just is disposed in rivers and open sources. It could be reused with very little effort if water managers in the city would think about agriculture rather than just about potable water supply to industry and households. Thank you.
Oui, je voudrais juste répondre à la préoccupation de...
I just wanted to deal with the question raised by the man from Burkina Faso, who talked about animal production. Well, with our mini gardens, we don't do much animal production. It's very small, but we have mini livestock farming as well. That's a new term. So you have a pen or cage, and we can breed chickens or fowl. And then on another shelf, you have a mini garden. So it's just another practical way to deal with animal and plant production. So that's what we did most recently in our project, and it's now being developed, and the future looks promising for it. So we have a blend of mini gardens and mini animal production. Yes, we also have a series of examples which you can see in the documentation, but we can provide the Burkina Faso delegate with some more information. Well, first of all, I wish to thank the interpreters on behalf of the organizers, the European Commission, the ACP, and the CTA, and the CONCORD group. This is something we forget about very often, but it's very important, and I wish to thank all the presenters. I found they were excellent, and they gave us various views of the issue. As we said at the start, it is complex, it is multidisciplinary, and in one day's session, you can't cover everything. But I hope that that's given you enough information. Well, for those who are not already involved in the sector, I hope that gave you the chance to learn a bit more. If you have experiences to share with us, we'll be happy to hear them. As far as I'm concerned, well, I can't make the concluding remarks without making a few recommendations which would come out from some of you, the CTA and the European Commission and the ACP, as we said this morning. We are very interested in job creation for youth, and it's a very promising sector. It can involve agriculture, IT, technologies, e-trade, the use of apps. Well, to attract youth to agriculture and cut down on migration, when you can't have time frames, very long time frames, the cities need fresh produce. We've stressed that point. So I think that one of the practical things which can come out of today's session is to do some sort of mapping of the success stories for the youth and for young entrepreneurs, as we've met here. And you can find them everywhere. They can talk about how much they produce, what was their business models, what they've been able to manage in urban agriculture. This is something we can do, but with that we can share experiences, and we can do scaling up through that. Now we talked about the policy framework, the regulatory frameworks for land use. That's necessary as well, particularly regarding, and we also need to talk about support for those involved in urban agriculture. And this morning we also saw something very important, and that's the new promising markets. We mentioned that for Europe and for Africa, for example, or biotourism, or selling organic products, providing them in hotels. Well, I buy organic products. I get it directly from the farm, so that it's a very promising sector. Of course, what was stressed a lot and what is critical in this sort of area is having the public and private sector work together. Everyone should benefit. Things are not working in traditional agriculture, but maybe we need to further explore and see how the private sector can help. Now, this has been repeated often. Well, when we talk about youth, we also include women, even the older ones like me. Well, women are very important stakeholders in urban agriculture, and they require special attention. So these are just a few comments I wanted to add. I wanted to thank you on behalf of the organizers once again. If it's the first time that you've come for a briefing, well, I would like to tell you it happens every 2 months, more or less. The next one will be in June. You'll get the exact date online or by email, and that will be on agriculture as a key sector for fragile states which are being rebuilt, or post-conflict states. We think that that's important, but we have the same. It's in the same mindset. Things that work on the ground. So thank you very much. This is one of the first briefings where we always running late. So I think we are within our time in this session. I hope to see you at the next briefing. There's a small lunch being offered downstairs. Don't expect too much from it. Its main purpose is for networking. Thank you very much. See you soon.